Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Dr. Allan Bacon. If you're not familiar with him, Dr. Allan holds a doctorate in dental surgery from the University of Maryland. He's a certified personal trainer through NSAM, a certified physique and bodybuilding coach, nutritionist, and certified coach for USA Powerlifting, and has formulated professionally for industry-leading dietary supplements company since 2009. So Allan, welcome onto the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, like I was telling you off air, really excited to dive into your background too. You have a pretty interesting background, right? Dental surgery. So curious to hear maybe how you got to where you are today and how, just so that way, if you go through that, I think that will help set the tone for the conversation and what people can expect from that aspect.
It's a circuitous route, right? Because
Yep.
it's a completely unrelated profession. And things started out because in high school, I was 6'1" and 170 pounds. And that's not a great place to be when you're playing some competitive sports. And so I started lifting then. And it was one of those things where I think a lot of people start to get into this. They get some progress and they start to get hooked on that type of thing. And so I kept that up for many years and went through professional schooling and continued doing it through then. And then I practiced for 10 years, seeing patients, running clinics, all that kind of thing. And it was great. But at some point, what ended up causing my transition was my father got throat cancer. And he had been a doctor for 35 years. And I spoke with him about some of the things that, what would you change if you had the ability to do this all over again? And one of the things that he had said was he wanted to spend some more time with his family. He wanted to spend some more time doing some of the things that he was really passionate about. And it really clicked with me because for those 10 years, I was getting 9 days off a year. And that included sick days. So if I got sick, I cut into my vacation time. And so it was one of those things where you make really good money in medical, but there's not always that quality of life. That balance is not necessarily there. And at the same time that he was struggling with throat cancer, I had this conversation with him, and I had dinner lined up with my in-laws on December 24th, and I missed it because I was doing emergency surgery at 8:30 p.m. And so that kind of struck me, and I was like, this is not something that is incredibly sustainable for me. And I want to start looking in another direction of what can I do that would be meaningful to me and viable. And so I turned to my wife, and it seemed like a good fit for us because one of the things that we really clicked on was the fact that she's very active too. She was a regionals qualifying CrossFit athlete. She was an American record. She was a holder of Olympic weightlifting American records. And so I turned to her and I said, hey, what if we start doing this coaching business on the side, because we're always in the gym anyways, and we get friends and we've been coaching them for free for years. Why don't we just start doing this as like a passion project? And she said, yeah, let's do it. And we made a good complement for each other because she can handle the CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting side, and I can handle the powerlifting, bodybuilding, and general health side. And things took off well. And we moved out to Maui where we live. And that's why our company's Maui Athletics. And it became the point where it was sustainable for life. And it wasn't that it was significantly more successful than medical because of how good of a career that is, how you make money, it's stable. But it offered that life balance to where when you can make your own time schedule, you can have some more time off, when you can work remotely from different areas, it just gave that benefit. And so we decided to go all in with that. And it's been crazy ever since then, and a really good move for me. And people talk to me a lot about this, or they ask me a lot about this because it's such a weird transition, right? And specifically people that are looking to get into coaching and want to talk about how did you make that shift? Because one, it's scary, but two, you lose that stability that you had in a position where this is what everybody has always told you that you should be working for. And the biggest thing that I think that people can start to look towards when they're wanting to make that change is realize that you might have to work your stable job and then shift into this type of thing. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're a failure. For the first 2 years that we ran this business, I was still working in medical, and that was okay because you need to provide for yourself, for your family. You need to pay bills and all that kind of stuff. then you need to figure out, okay, what is the point where I'm going to be happy with what I have, where this sustains the lifestyle that I want to achieve? And mine was pretty easy because we don't have kids. And so the one thing that I had always said to myself is whenever we go out to dinner, as long as I don't have to really worry about the prices on the menu, assuming I'm not getting anything ridiculous, then I'm doing pretty well. And it got to that point. And so that made at that point, it made sense to make that shift. And I want to stress to people that are thinking about taking these types of leaps that working 2 jobs at one time is not a sign that you're failing. It means that you're responsible and you're working towards that goal that you want to achieve, but you're doing it in a smart manner. And I think that's how you make that jump from something that's scary to, can we make this work? And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. You've still retained that job that can support your lifestyle, and you tried, and then you have no regrets. So I think either way, this gives you that right platform to make that jump from.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Yeah, you just, like you said, that work-life balance wasn't there. And I do tend to hear that from, like you said, with jobs like that. And so you made that transition. And like you said, it is going to be a tough one, and you're going to have to probably work your other job for a little bit of time, because this is a tough field, I feel like, to just go all in. Because obviously if you don't have clients, you're not making money. So you do have to have that period of time there where it's probably going to be tough, but you obviously knew that you wanted to do this. So probably made it easier.
No, you're dead on. And I think that the reason that the switch took the time that it did was, when you're first getting into coaching, people don't really know how to tell whether you're credible or not, just from, hey, you saying things like, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. And so it takes time to build a portfolio of, look at the successes that we've had with past clients. Can that transfer over to you? And in a lot of cases, if you start to see success after success, that can give people that are looking into you as a potential coach the confidence to make that leap. And so I think that no matter what you do when you're starting off in this, get a website, at least have a simple contact form, and then the ability to display some of your results, no matter what they are, whether it's, if you're working with competitive athletes, showing some of the competitions that they've done and succeeded in. If you're a physique coach, what you've done. If you're a health coach, what you've done, all that kind of thing. And that can give people a little bit more confidence in your ability.
Yeah, 100%. That is tough too, right? You like you said, you want to be able to show that you can help people. People do want to see that you can. So that always is a challenge too, the first couple of years. How long have you had your business?
Officially, we've been a company for 5 years.
5. Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, we were doing coaching for many years before that, but that was prior to actually shifting careers. And so that was more of a passion project, like I said, at the time. And even then, even throughout my entire career with medicine, I was formulating for supplement industry.
Yeah.
But that was that time where message boards were really big, and it was bodybuilding.com and all that kind of stuff. So that's where you were making connections. And that did make it a lot easier to hit the ground running into fitness. And I think that you can do something similar if you're looking to become a coach, become acquainted with a lot of the gyms in your area, make friends in the fitness community, and use that as a jumping off point.
And I'm sure you're able to leverage your doctorate in dental surgery as well too. I'm sure that was something that probably helped out at least a little bit. Was there any carryover, or?
I think practically there's more carryover than there is from a respect standpoint, because it's a completely unrelated field, right?
Yeah, right.
But I think practically there is benefit to that, because in dental, just like in any other medical, you go through med school, anatomy and physiology, you go through med school biology, all that kind of stuff. And so you at least should have a slightly better grasp on the body, the way things work, which should give you an ability to read some of the research, get into that fitness and nutrition research, and start to teach yourself a little bit better than somebody that might not have that background. Now, does that always carry over? No. There's certainly tons of examples of doctors out there that really have no clue what they're doing in fitness and nutrition, but it's a good starting point.
Right.
And it can give you that confidence to be able to say, okay, I can start really looking into this. I can start doing the certification courses. I can start doing the continuing education and really get a good basis so I can help people.
And hey, you have to be smart, obviously, to get through all those courses and to get your doctorate. So again, that good baseline there is definitely there. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the formulated dietary supplements. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that. That sounds super interesting. Curious how you got into that. What did that kind of entail? Is there any maybe big takeaways from being in that industry that you had, or anything like that?
So dietary supplements, I got into that because I was a regular on the bodybuilding.com forums, and particularly in the supplement forum. And that was when I was reading the research on all the different ingredients that were coming out and everything like that. And so when people had questions, you would answer those questions. And over time, a lot of times questions would come up if I was putting together my own, what would be an optimal formulation for whatever it is. And a lot of times people would say, okay, I want to make a pre-workout. What should I put into it? And you would start giving recommendations. And I think that it was through that it was recognized by some companies that I had some formulation ability. And I think the sad fact is, and I don't think that a lot of people realize this, for a lot of companies, you don't have scientists making these formulations. You have a lot of normal guys going in and trying to do this. And so having a little bit of a background in that ability to read research and suss out some of the ingredients that haven't been used before or at what doses can be really beneficial. And so companies started to pick me up to do contract work. I actually became the lead formulator of Controlled Labs at the time. And I did that for quite a while as they were growing and building their brand. And recently I've moved to Legion Athletics.
Oh, awesome.
With Mike Matthews. And the formulators over there are actually the guy that's one of the co-founders of Examine.com, and Grant Tinsley, who you had mentioned was on your show before. And stepping into a role to be able to help a company with those type of guys, that makes a big difference to be able to get some good things out onto the market. And so this is one of those things that, again, it was a passion project that sort of led into a really good transition into a paying job. But it all came from the fact that I put in the work to be able to figure this out and research into it, because the reality of most things in fitness and nutrition is that there's not formal education for a lot of this stuff. And I think that you probably know that as a coach, right? You want to look into a certain topic. It's very rare that you can find a continuing education course that's going to completely encompass whatever you're trying to talk about. And so a lot of this is self-taught. And what are the ways that you learn in this industry? And certainly CE is a great choice, but I think even more than that, finding the right sources that you can learn from, or finding a mentor that is willing to help guide you through some of the questions that you have is a very beneficial thing. And these podcasts are great too, because as a podcast host, you have a couple benefits. One, you get to research the people that you bring on, and you get to bring on people that you feel are relevant or beneficial for your audience. Two, you get to learn from whoever you bring on. And not saying that you don't know what you're talking about, but the great thing about these situations where you get a lot of good coaches together, you included, is that you always learn something new from each other. And even in these podcasts, if I'm to bring up a topic and I say it to you and I say, this is what I do with my clients, and you say, this is what I do with my clients, and we both look at that, and I think, I really like this part about what he does that I'm not doing. And you look at it and you're like, I like this something else about what you're doing. And so you hone your craft by getting this meeting of the minds almost in these situations.
Yeah.
And the supplement industry is a little bit different in that there's a lot of really self-taught guys, but if you get the right group, and I think that certain companies do have that, then you get a lot of guys that can really say, hey, I was researching this ingredient, this would work for this would work for this, and then you get the right end product.
Yeah.
And just to cut you off completely, but to as a caveat to all this, even though I'm in the supplement industry and I work for the supplement industry, realize that these things are supplements. And that doesn't mean that this is something that's necessary to progress. It doesn't mean that this is something that your success hinges on. In certain situations, yeah, some of these things can help. They're the small drop in the bucket. But if you've covered everything else, sure, look into these types of things. And particularly if they are motivational from hey, this makes me want to get into the gym, this makes me really feel like I'm engaged with what I'm doing. Yeah, they can have a lot of benefits.
100%. Yep. No, and you work in the supplement industry, and you're saying that. So you have the experience there with that. And yeah, no, supplements, just like you said, you got to focus on everything else, but you're hitting on the podcast stuff. And I wanted to hit on a few things there. Definitely, like you said, I've definitely change, like there's been a lot of things when I've had conversations with certain guests that's definitely crafted, it's changed my craft at least a little bit, where it's, man, I never thought of it that way. And actually like talking to somebody, man, I didn't realize that. And I've implemented those things. So that's awesome. Like you said, you get to meet with people and you get to chat with them, and it really does alter that. But then also, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on here was just to learn a little bit more about your background. And I honestly had no idea that you worked with Legion doing formulations for them. So finding things out like that is also key. I know that you've posted about Legion multiple times on your social media, but I didn't realize that. And so I'm actually intrigued by this because this wasn't something that I planned on talking to you about, but I'm just curious, what does that kind of involve like now? Is it just like staying up to date on research and stuff like that? Or what are your like roles there with that?
It always takes staying up to date on research, because the supplement industry is a little bit different from a research perspective than a lot of different things. Because if you look at things like, the closest thing would be like medical pharma, and medical pharma has these very strict, understandably, testing procedures, safety testing, efficacy testing, all that. And supplement industry is not quite up to those standards. It's much more lax. And so when you're doing supplements, it's difficult at times because you wish that you could have better controlled studies, or you wish that you could have more thorough knowledge on an ingredient. And the reality is that the research moves at a much slower pace than it does for medical, because there's much less of a payoff for the companies that are doing it. So either you have to rely on the information that's being put out by universities that are just looking at this usually because they want something for their sports teams, or look at what has been done in the past. And so you're relying on a lot of generalized data. And so when you get a group together that's working to formulate these things, you try to keep up on what the most recent information is, because things are always changing and stuff seems to filter in without you expecting it. When there are these big trials in pharma, there's an announcement. We've got this drug that's going to be working on non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and we're going to be following this for 8 years. Whereas supplements, it's like, hey, look what we did this past year. And you're like, oh shit, this is an ingredient that I was thinking about putting into this stuff. And so you constantly try to update the items that you have to be at the forefront of the industry, because somebody else is going to be looking to do that too. And in 2014 or 2015, they passed a new law. Don't quote me on that exact date. It was somewhere around that time period. They passed a new law where, prior to that, supplements were like the Wild West, and we could literally take almost anything that we could find and put it into stuff, as long as it didn't trigger a, hey, this is an illegal substance type thing. So you saw a lot more innovation at that time period than you do now. Now things change a lot less quickly, because the way that they've reworked the laws, at least in the United States, is that an ingredient has to have been considered safe for general use prior to 1994. And if you want to bring in something new that's after that time period, then it requires some of those more strict testing procedures that is more in line with what pharma does than what has been done historically in the supplement industry. So there's this race at this point. Instead of trying to find the newest ingredient, it's trying to find the best combinations of the almost existing ingredients, because it's cost prohibitive to constantly be testing new things when you're probably not going to find something that's better than creatine. And creatine is the gold standard of supplements for a reason. It's extremely efficacious for the majority of people. It is extremely safe, and it's cheap. And so if you can find something along those lines, that's exactly what you want to find, to be able to put into a product, to be able to say, hey, look, we've got something that works. But the reality these days is finding newer and newer ingredients becomes difficult, because the testing procedures are becoming more and more strict, which means then what you're going to have to do is find the companies or the formulators that are making the smartest combinations of ingredients. So it's cut that almost Wild West style of formulating that we had before 2014, 2015 out of the picture entirely. And so now when these companies are looking for people, they're looking for people with a bit more of a pedigree background to be able to identify this. And this is why people like Grant and the Examine guys get jobs in the industry, because they've proven through years of research and their reputation that they know what they're doing.
Right.
So these days, the good news in the supplement industry, the bad news is you're less likely to stumble on something that you haven't tried before. The good news is it's probably safer than it's ever been before. And so there's that give and take. So as a formulator, I'm like, this is less fun because you've got there are more reins in place, but I understand why there are.
And then you also have, as you were talking about that in terms of safeness, which honestly, I'm sure most people are like, okay, hey, I would rather, and as a coach, I'd rather hear that than, oh, hey, there's going to be some crazy formulation. I definitely would have the safer side of things for sure. But as you were talking about this, I couldn't help but think about Jacked 3D.
That's 100% what I was going to bring up. That came out of that time period when it was the lawless Wild West. And that was one of those things where there's a lot of controversy around both Jacked, and the other example would be Craze from those periods, if you're familiar with those. And so those two, I think, are probably what triggered these new laws in 2014, 2015. And it takes years for laws to catch up to what's actually happening. And Jacked came on the market in the early 2000s?
Yes.
And then Craze came on the market in the mid to late, like 2006, 2007, something like that. And they had these just stimulants that were like, should these actually be in over the counter type formulations? And that's where like questions started to happen. And the issue with them was caffeine has massive amounts of safety data. And the idea at the time was, how can we make it so people have an experience beyond caffeine? And that's where they started to pull from these ingredients that were gray market at best. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And the issue with it at the time was we didn't really know how safe are these. And I was never part of a formulation team that put anything like that out. And I actually chose to work with companies that wouldn't do that, because I actually did feel a way about that kind of thing. But at the time, it was really difficult to compete with those companies, because if you're like, hey, look at our caffeine. And in the early 2000s, I don't know if you remember this, it was like 150 milligrams of caffeine in a pre-workout. And we've slowly crept up
it's like
year after year to more and more caffeine, because I think that the people that started taking those original pre-workouts built up that tolerance. And then we're like, okay, for the next one, for them to feel something, it's got to go up and up. And for the longest time, I was always against adding more and more stimulant into a product, because from a performance standpoint, you're not going to get an increase in performance from a more modest amount to a massive amount. You're just going to feel it a little bit more. And so at the time, they wanted to do that because they wanted people to say, okay, I feel something different with this than what I've ever felt before. And that was at the time was the pre-workout arms race, where people were looking for more and more bizarre and wild stimulants. And I really do think that's what triggered this 2014, 2015 law, where all of a sudden they're like, you guys need to slow this down, because there's potential for issues. And with Jacked specifically, I think it was University of Georgia. There was a football player that had a myocardial infarction or something like that during two-a-days football practice. And I don't think that it was ever really conclusively, he said that he took Jacked, and yes, it was probably Jacked that caused it, but I don't think it was conclusively the 1,3-DMAA, which is what was the extra ingredient in there. I don't think that necessarily was the problem. I think that the problem was combining heavy stimulants, and I think that this could have happened with 300 milligrams of caffeine. I think that the problem was combining heavy stimulants with a 2-a-day practice in Georgia heat and humidity in pads. And it was like that perfect storm. But the fact that was in a product at all for like a 20-year-old kid is an issue. And so what do you do these days? If you look at the research that looks at how many supplements are tainted out there, have you ever done that? It's insane. It's 30% of supplements either have a contaminant or are intentionally contaminated. And having been in the supplement industry for so long, one of the things that I can tell you that gets done is companies, if one company comes out with a product and it gets like rave reviews beyond, we look at the ingredient list and we're like, this should not be getting the reviews that it's getting. a lot of companies will test that behind the scenes to see what's in it. And even the biggest companies in fitness built a lot of their following off the fact that they would intentionally put farm ingredients into products. And for the first one or two runs of it, and then it would build up so much hype, they would pull that out of the ingredient, the profile, but this wouldn't be listed on the label. And so it would build up the hype for the product, and then people wouldn't really realize what had happened, and that would sell the product pretty big. And so when companies do these tests behind the scenes, you find some of the craziest shit in some of these products. I remember a B12 product that people were telling us was giving them tons of energy, and we tested it and it had caffeine and a prohormone in it.
Oh man.
And it was a B12 supplement. But the reason that they do this is because these smaller companies can break into the big game by getting a word of mouth going through these types of things. So the reason that I went down this meandering path to this point is, if you're a consumer, and particularly if you're an athlete that competes in a tested federation of some kind or college sports, stick with the larger companies that have more to lose. And hopefully you can identify the companies that actually have good ethics, because that's what you really want. But the bigger, more established companies, rather than some of those small fringe companies, they have more to lose. And so it's less likely that there's going to be exotic stimulants that could make you pop hot and lose your scholarship, or prohormones that could disqualify you from your meet, or whatever it is, because the 200 grand that they're going to make on one SKU that they send out with tainted product is not going to be worth the lawsuits that they receive afterwards. So when you're in this supplement game, one, it's good. Things are getting safer. Two, things are still pretty tainted. When they do these studies that look at random samplings, they buy from Amazon, they buy from bodybuilding.com, and they bring these things in, there is the potential that these do have either unintentional or intentional contaminants, and it tends to be a big problem in this industry. 30% is a lot.
Yeah.
And be conscious of that. And if you're going to be doing these types of things, really look into the types of companies that you're trying to buy from. Ask for third-party purity testing if you can. A lot of companies will put that out. CGMP is a good thing if you're familiar with that. What that means is that it's a general practices license, and it means that they're made in a facility that assures no cross-contamination, which tends to be a problem. NSF, safe for sports, a good thing to look for. Does that mean that these are necessary for a good product? No, because companies like Optimum Nutrition, they don't necessarily pay for NSFs for sport or things like that. And there's a reason that they don't. It doesn't make any sense for them. They control production from start to finish. They don't need to worry about cross-contamination since they're the one that's doing it. So it would just cost them extra money. But if you have a question about some of these products, those are some of the things that are good to look into, because they can give you a little bit more surety that what you're getting is what it says on the label.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I do want to hit on a few more that maybe that people can be aware of, so they understand that they're getting good products. But the issue, like you said, is for athletes, like it could have something that's potentially banned for them. But even like that one that you mentioned there with the B12, it's if you're just a regular person, Gen Pop person, you don't have to necessarily test for anything. You could be taking something that, again, you're taking, like you said, what was it? It ended up being some caffeine or
and a prohormone. So so you could theoretically, I don't remember exactly which prohormone it was. That's why I was just saying a prohormone.
Yeah.
But those oral prohormones, the 17 alpha methylated ones in particular, are pretty liver toxic. And with the B12 supplement, you would almost never think twice about taking that for really long periods of time. But if there's a prohormone in it, you could experience issues where it shuts down your testosterone production. It could be potentially liver toxic. It could potentially be kidney toxic, renal issues, and these things just aren't worth it. Buy from reputable companies. I try to warn people a little bit about buying from Amazon. Not that they're all a problem, but Amazon has had some issues with some fake products. So if you can buy from the company's website, that's the best way to assure that you're getting legit product. But this is an issue that has been ongoing in the supplement industry for decades. And I don't think that everyone realizes how prevalent of an issue it is.
Yeah. Yeah. People are just, oh, hey, either looking at reviews or they're just buying maybe the cheapest one that they can find online as well, too. And that's what's informing their decision. And two, on the caffeine side of things, even something like caffeine that's obviously legal and people consume it all the time. There's probably a lot of situations and whatnot where it's not going to be advisable to take caffeine. So even if something like that's in it, it's like, hey, maybe not a big deal. It's not illegal, but it's pregnancy. If you're having sleep issues, oh, why can't I fall asleep? And you're having this. So even something that's safe like caffeine, you got to be careful with that too.
That's a funny thing too when you talk about sleep issues, because the half-life of caffeine, like people metabolize caffeine very differently. It's the amount of time that it takes you to clear it from your system varies wildly between people. And so when we look at that, we talk about the fact that for most people, it's about 5 or 6 hours, but for some people, it can be 9 or 10. So you could be taking this at like noon at lunch, and you might have problems going to sleep if you go to bed a little bit early. And I don't think that people would really be cued into this type of thing. And you as a coach, I'm sure that you've seen some of the research, or at least have heard some of the research on sleep and its benefits. This is one of the big things in fitness that I consistently hammer into my clients, that everyone listens to and then doesn't hear. Sleep is extremely important for performance and physique goals. This is just completely ignoring the mental and emotional side of things, which is what we should be focusing on, the real issues. But let's be honest, we're coaches. And so what we try to point people towards is the things that really matter to them. And people say that health matters to them, but I think that health gets put on the back burner a little bit, because when you don't have health problems, you don't really appreciate it until you do. And so the way that I point out this whole concept of sleep to people is, and particularly men, I can really jam home this point for men. When you're a lifter, the research suggests that about 8 to 9 hours is probably optimal for performance, physique, and everything like that. Just as well as I do, that the main thing that guides weight loss or weight gain is calories in versus calories out, energy expenditure, right? That doesn't tell you what is gained or what is lost. And sleep has a big effect on this. Both nutrition and sleep the quality of your nutrition and sleep have big effects on this. When you are sleep deprived, and that's anywhere from they haven't nailed it completely. It's either at 7 hours, somewhere from 6 to 7 hours. 6.5 seems to be a pretty reliable trigger, 7 for some people. When you are sleep deprived, you will lose and gain the same amount of weight, but you'll lose significantly more muscle mass, and you will lose significantly less fat in a calorie deficit. And the reverse will happen in a calorie surplus when you're trying to gain muscle. You'll gain significantly more muscle if you have good sleep. You'll gain significantly more fat if you have, let's say, less than 7 or 6.5 hours of sleep. To jam home this point with my male clients, I also point out the fact that the time frames are about the same. At 8 hours, you tend to optimize this. At about 6.5, you could have up to 50% less testosterone. Now, I know people don't care about health, but when you bring up the fact that you're going to lose 50% testosterone, they're like, holy shit, I should be getting on a B12 supplement to counterbalance the loss of testosterone that I just had. And I get that quality sleep is difficult today because we're inundated with work, social obligations, the fact that the only time that we can unwind is at 8 p.m. in bed, watching a YouTube video that we have no business watching, and we just got caught in this rabbit hole of following this. But if you have very distinct health, physique, and performance goals, sleep is one of the most important. You know how we talked about supplements as one of the least important? Sleep is one of the most important things possible. And we got onto this because we were talking about caffeine and stimulants, but this is a really good thing to point out, because if this is the issue that you're experiencing, and you didn't even think about it because you were having it at 12 or 1, this could be a wake-up call for you. And this could be the reason that you're experiencing this, because the average time for clearing that caffeine out of your system is between about 4 and maybe 9 hours. Now, most people, it is 5 and 6, between 5 and 6, but there are some people that it's 9 and 10. And so if you're finding that this is an issue, then take it earlier in the day, switch to a non-stimulant pre-workout. If you really want to take a pre-workout and you work out in the afternoon, switch to a non-stimulant. There are ways to get around this, but don't sleep on sleep hygiene, because it's a big thing.
It is, man. I'm glad you went down that rabbit hole. Yep. And like you said, that was something I did. I used to love the pre-workouts, right? I took Jacked at one point, like you were talking about, and I did recently switch to stem free just because I drink coffee in the morning and it's just, man, I just don't want to be sipping on that, but on any caffeine or add more caffeine on top of that. So
Right.
I love the stem free as well. And then that study that you brought up there about, that's always my go-to one that I bring up when I talk about sleep. The one where it's like, hey, you still lose the same amount of weight. The likelihood of it being more muscle versus fat mass is huge. And that's a good kind of, I don't want to say scare tactic, but it is one that really hits home because like you said, people do hear sleep and that's where it's whatever.
Maybe this is a bad coaching choice on my part. I don't mind if we've talked about it a couple of times. I don't mind a scare tactic as long as we're not exaggerating, and as long as we're sticking to, hey, look, I can back this up. And there are multiple studies that show this. And if anybody that's listening to this wants to see those, certainly contact Jeff or contact myself and we can get you that information. But it's big. It's 50% or greater shifts in how much body fat that you lose. And if people look at how much body fat is you're really expected to lose weekly on a proper fat loss diet, it's a lot less than what you would expect, because people always get caught up in that the biggest loser mindset where they're losing like 5 or 6 pounds a week. That's unrealistic for most people, especially outside of that first month. Sure, you're going to drop water weight and muscle glycogen really quickly in that first time period, but when you get down to it, you're going to start losing it 1-2 pounds a week. And then when you start to get leaner and leaner, even less. And so cutting off 50% of that loss adds up to a big amount overall, and an even bigger visual perception of change.
And I feel like too, that ends up being, people aren't careful of what they are losing when they're dropping. That's where it ends up being like, oh, I just need to keep losing another 5 to 10 pounds or another 10 to 15 pounds. And that can end up being a vicious kind of cycle there.
And then you're stuck in that skinny fat state. And then what's harder? Losing the body, not harder. What takes more time? Losing the body fat or building that lean muscle? And I get questions all the time about, hey, should I fast for a week to kickstart this? No, you want to retain as much lean muscle as you possibly can. And this is not intended to be sexist, but I find that question tends to come from women more often than men.
Yeah.
And the reality is that women more than men, just because of how we were typically raised, could do with adding or retaining as much lean muscle as possible, because men are being idiots running around trying to show off to each other. So we build a little bit of lean muscle when we're growing up. The shift these days where women are lifting more, CrossFit's becoming more prevalent, is wonderful. In the past, that has not been the case. And so we have a lot of women who are 30s, 40s, 50s that have not banked that level of lean muscle. Nobody can really afford to lose muscle. But when you have less, relatively, when you lose some, you're losing a larger percentage.
Yeah.
And what does this give you? You will look better at higher levels of body fat with more lean muscle. You'll burn more body fat just sitting around doing nothing. Your basal metabolic rate will be higher with more muscle. You will have less issues with falls. You'll have less issues with ambulatory issues. You'll be able to have a greater quality of life when you're getting older. And the more muscle that you can bank early on, the better your quality of life will be later in life. And I've actually been in conversations with coaches, and I always talk about pushing progressive overload. Push yourself to always try to do a little bit better than what you did in the previous week, as much as you can. And always bring your working sets when you're lifting weights close to failure. And even as we age, I still push that to people. And the reason that I push that to people is we may not be able to consistently do better and better, because at some point you're going to reach whatever your potential is. But you can always try to do better. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to maintain or build as much lean muscle as possible, which is going to make your life as good as possible. And I feel that some coaches have talked to me about the idea of, my client just wants to maintain. Should they always be pushing it? And I always say, yes, they should still always be pushing it, because that's going to make it most likely that they can maintain. Because even if you look at the research that shows, okay, if you tell a person, I want you to lift 12 reps and I want you to lift to failure, choose a weight that you think that you can lift to failure, they're usually about 5 reps off. If we can get them pushing closer to failure and not necessarily going beyond their ability, they're going to give themselves the best chance of having the body composition that they want, having the quality of life that they want, and living the life that they want.
Yep, 100%. It's the mindset of it too, right? I think here in maintaining is a lot for whatever reason from a mindset standpoint. Like whether
It's
you say,
demotivating.
yeah, you whether you say maintenance calories or you say maintenance whatever, the mindset of things just changes. No, I agree that hey, we're still going to push it, and then like you said, worst case, you maintain what you have, which that in itself with the muscles, your muscle like that's going to really pay off long term. Is so it's important to have that mindset. So real quick, I want to two things how I want to go with this conversation. One, I want to cycle back to something real quick with the supplements before we wrap that up, because I want to wrap that up. And then the topic that we just were talking about, I feel like this kind of brings us to a good point to talk about the study that you posted in your social media. And I told you I wanted to hit on, because I think it's going to be cool to touch on that based on what we were just talking about. So real quick, just to wrap up the supplement talk, what are, and you alluded to it a couple times, like throughout as you were talking, what would be like just maybe a couple things that you would have somebody look out for when they are buying a supplement, just in case so that way they don't overlook anything. And then we'll switch back to the muscle building talk.
So it's such a broad question. It's hard to give a very specific answer there. The biggest things that I would look out for is, one, are you a competitive athlete that's being tested in some way? If that's the case, then I would have more of a concern for cross-contamination or something like I'd be a little bit more worried about that. So CGMP and NSF Safe for Sport are good certifications to look for on products. You could even contact the companies and hopefully they'll have a good dialogue with you about, okay, maybe we can provide you with some of our purity testing in certain products. I think that's a good thing to look into. But my biggest thing is stick with more established companies, just because with these smaller fringe companies, you're going to have a much higher chance of accidentally getting something that's unintentionally or intentionally spiked. And so when you're looking for something specific, there could be a different answer for a specific genre of a pre-workout or something like that. But in general, do your research, contact the company if you can, and say, hey, this is a concern of mine. What do you have? What can help alleviate these concerns? And hopefully they'll have a dialogue with you.
Yeah, cool. So main takeaway is obviously look for some of those, make sure they have what would you call it? What is that called? When you
CGMP. CGMP is a certification, and that is for preventing cross-contamination. Because in the supplement industry, very few companies actually make their own products. So what happens is a company will formulate a product and they'll come up with a formulation, and then they will contact a manufacturer. And there's 2 or 3 big manufacturers out there. And so then these manufacturers will produce the product, they will package it, they will send it to the company, and then the company sells it to you. Because most of these companies, they don't own a manufacturing plant. They don't own, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that. Some do, ON does, but most don't. Optimum Nutrition does, but most don't. And then the other one, there are Safe for Sport certifications. The one that immediately comes to mind is NSF, Safe for Sport. And these are specifically made for people that are college athletes. And so it doesn't assure that you are within WADA, which is the rule set. It doesn't assure that you are within the WADA rule set. You need to double check that yourself, because the issue is that WADA changes the ingredients on its list quite a bit. And so NSF for Sport means that they have some more safety precautions in play. Still look at the ingredients that are on whatever you're trying to do, and then what you're trying to take, and then compare them to the WADA list. But NSF Safe for Sport is a good indicator that whatever you're buying is likely going to be WADA compliant.
Perfect. Yeah. Just wanted to hear, from somebody that works in the industry, just because, sometimes it can be confusing. There's a ton of different supplements out there. So just getting some general idea of what that looks like and what to look for. Super helpful. So let's go back to the muscle building talk. I know you posted a study. I just came across this the other day too, and just diving into it. So it's energy deficiency impairs resistance training gains in lean mass, but not strength. And this by Murphy and I guess Kohler, I guess would be how you would pronounce it. And so I just want to hear your thoughts on it. I'm not sure how in depth you looked into the study, but just maybe some of your things that you found that were super interesting, and maybe how it can apply to just people who are looking to get stronger and build muscle.
So I think that the big thing that this study points out, I actually really like this study. I think it was very well done. And that was one of the reasons that I did the review on it. Was I looked at this and I said, okay, it meets my preconceived notions, which is always a good thing. I love challenging myself, but when something aligns with the way that you look at things, you're like, this is awesome. This is great. And this is a systemic review. So they took a big review of all the different information that was out there to establish these data points. And it's almost controversial these days when you talk to coaches, and when a client goes to a coach and somebody that wants to get a better physique, I think literally everybody says, I want to build some lean muscle and I want to lose body fat. The reality of the situation, and there's tons of coaches out there that will tell you, yeah, we can do both of these at the same time. The reality of the situation is, with saying that without having some building some expectations is probably going to set up the wrong expectations, because this study points us to the idea that when calorie levels are controlled well, the chances of building significant lean muscle in a calorie deficit, it's very low. And it's not that it doesn't happen. It does. It 100% happens. It's just slow. And it's very slow. And so when a coach says, okay, look at this information, I can show you that you can do both at the same time, they're not lying. But when someone says, I can show you that these do both at the same time without any other follow-up to that, maybe you're getting the wrong expectation of how fast you can do both of these at the same time. Now, if you are very obese, if you are brand new to training, if you are returning from an injury, or if you are on steroids, you can do both pretty quickly at the same time. And so when I get clients that'll come to me and they're like, I'm 5'10", I'm 320 pounds, what should we do? And I'm like, we can do both, because you're going to build some lean muscle. First off, we want to get you out of having some obesity, because that's going to be much better for your health overall. But because of this extra energy and the fact that body fat can be metabolically beneficial from it, can save you from pulling from muscle stores, right? And so they have extra energy, so we can drop their calorie amounts a little bit more aggressively than we could, say, a leaner individual. The leaner you are, the more experienced with exercise that you are, weight training that you are, the less likely you're going to do both at the same time at a significant rate. And so if that's the case, if you get somebody that comes to you and they said, okay, I've been training for 2 years consistently, and I'm roughly 23% body fat. That's not obese. You're just a normal guy. You've got some good body, lean muscle levels. I want to do both at the same time. Cool. Let's prepare to be doing this for a couple years.
Yeah.
Yes, years. Because you're not going to see massive differences unless you're a genetic outlier where you gain muscle very easily, but you would probably know that.
You would know.
Yeah. You're going to want to keep one of the things that this study shows is you're going to want to keep that calorie deficit modest. If you are not a very obese individual, you always want to keep the calorie deficit modest. And this bothers people because they want to see the scale go down fast, because one of the goals is I want to lose fat, and they always equate that with the scale dropping. You still don't want to do it fast. You want to stick within that 250 to 500 calorie per day deficit. How do you know that you're in that? That's where your rate of loss is anywhere between maybe 0.5 to maybe 1.5 pounds per week. And that's going to be dependent on how much body fat that you have. But if you have a good coach, you're going to be telling people these things. And it's not to discourage them, although it does a lot of the time. If you tell somebody, hey, you're not obese, which should be a good thing, so this is going to take longer than what you hope, they look at that and it's, if this isn't going to be done in 3 or 4 months, then I feel a little bit discouraged. But if you're going to be making these changes, you have to realize that this is a life change anyway. So you're going to want to mentally prepare yourself to sign on for the long haul. Now, can you get there? Yes, you can. And this study shows that you can get there. You can build muscle in a calorie deficit. Let me go to the scatter plot here real quick.
Yeah.
When you do this, it is much more likely that you're going to be building some of that lean muscle if you keep your calorie deficit less than 250 calories below maintenance. Now, if you do that, there are going to be many weeks in a row where your scale weight may not change. And that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't working. It means you're potentially offsetting some of that drop in scale weight with building some lean muscle weight. But people will often think, I'm not doing anything. And so the other thing that this study shows you is that even in these 250 to 500 calorie per day deficits, we can still gain significant strength. That's wonderful. So let's, even if our goal is physique, let's switch our sign of success from seeing changes on the scale and seeing changes in the mirror week to week, and even sometimes a month, to what is our strength doing? Because if over time your strength is consistently going up, there's a very high likelihood that you're probably putting on some lean muscle in the process. You can't continually get stronger and not put on lean muscle. Neural adaptation gains that come from strength training last 12 or 16 weeks. So it's not just a neural thing. You're not just learning to fire that muscle better. So at some point, those gains from that neural adaptation kick out. And then if you're continuing to gain strength over time, you're very likely putting on lean muscle. So you need to switch your priorities of how am I progressing from scale and mirror changes to, do I feel better? Am I getting stronger? Is my performance improving? And if you do that, you're going to be okay. But this is a great study. I love that you pointed this one out, because it is almost a seminal study in being able to set proper expectations. One, in how long it's going to take you to build muscle, but two, in also saying, look, you want to lose weight super quickly, but if we do that, you're going to lose that lean muscle that we've talked about that's so important to bank. And your focus is now not on actually getting healthier or getting a better physique. It's on watching the scale drop. And that's missing the point. And so I think that this study is great in that it shows us if we have the right setup, if we're keeping protein high, if we're lifting heavy, if we're sleeping well, and if we're relieving our stress, we can do both. But we need to temper our expectations on how long is this going to take? What can I expect along this process? And knowing that this is going to take longer than I want, because it always does. It always takes longer than what you want. Because of that, what do we then use as our signs of success? And this is where a lot of coaches put out a good message where they say, I would really love my clients to start valuing performance as much as they do changes on the scale or changes in progress pictures. And that's really true, because when you start to do that, gives you a sustainable thing to look at as a measurement of, am I improving? So this is a great study.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily tell everyone what they want to see, but it gives you the reality of biology. And people will point out, I had a friend that gained a lot of muscle while losing body fat. Okay, did they just start doing this? Was this a college kid that was just now finally at the point where he could build muscle? Because that happens. You're no longer a child and you've gotten to the point where you can start laying on some lean muscle. Yeah, this happens in college. And a lot of times it happens in college because you're finally getting into a calorie surplus and you just don't realize it, because you would normally put on the freshman 15, but you put on the freshman 15 lean pounds instead of body fat. And so people don't identify what's actually happening there. They're not in a calorie deficit. They're actually at maintenance or above. And maybe they had some body recomposition. Maybe they lost some body fat and put on some lean muscle. Or maybe the fact that they have more lean muscle and they have a little higher body fat percentage, they still look leaner because they have more lean muscle. And particularly for clients that are coming in or people that are saying, oh, I have that traditional skinny fat body composition, this is extremely important, because your natural inclination is going to be, well, if I lose the fat, then I'll look better.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily the case. And what the reality of the situation is, you probably need to spend a year or two around maintenance. And that's discouraging to hear, because you're not going to look the way that you want to look for maybe 2 years. But it's the fastest way out of what you currently have.
Yep.
Short of steroids, short of B12.
B12, yeah.
And so people hate hearing this. And I have certainly had people that were potential clients say, you know what, I'm just not, this isn't for me. And it turns people away. But I would rather people know what they should expect and get into it with the right expectations for moving forward, buy into the process. Because if you do that, your journey is much easier.
Yep. Having the right expectations is key, right? Because then, like you said, people get so focused on that scale weight, but it obviously comes at a cost of going quicker. And yeah, the main things that everything you said, I think was spot on. And basically, like for me, it just, hey, and I know the study says this, but like the larger the energy deficit, meaning, hey, the quicker the weight loss, the more and more it impaired strength gains. And I think almost even to the point to where they said like the cutoff for even to maintain was around 500, correct? Or was that just
at 500, if you take all the data points together, that's where you consistently, and this could be different for each person. Some people, this might be a little bit less, but for the majority of people at 500 calories of a deficit per day, you're going to actually lose lean mass. You're no longer going to be in that position where you can gain lean mass. And this is where it becomes really prohibitive. And that's why when you talk about calorie deficits for people that are in general body compositions, like leaner to overweight, but not necessarily obese. Obese, you can take it a little bit farther because you have some protection from the higher levels of body fat, but I wouldn't necessarily stress it significantly farther than that. But this is why, if you've worked with a coach before, they've tried to slow you down, because one of the goals that we have as coaches is to protect you from yourself as much as we want to get you to the goal that you want to achieve. It's getting you to the goal that you want to achieve in the proper, sustainable way, not necessarily I saw this on TV body transformation way. They're two totally different things.
They are. But and the other takeaway too for me was like, hey, like being at maintenance and obviously even a surplus, like that's going to obviously be king for building muscle. Like clearly this kind of shows that, hey, that's the optimal energy balance that you want to be in there.
Yeah. If your goal is to build muscle, you will never build muscle in a deficit as well as you will build it in a surplus. Never. And people have tried recently to push this whole idea of like main gaining as an alternative. And main gaining is just a marketing term for, we're just going to sit at maintenance and have some body recomposition. It's not really a different method. They don't call it maintenance. And it's brilliant from a marketing standpoint, because anytime you tell a client, we're going to go to maintenance because this is where you'll get that body recomposition that you're looking for, maintenance is interpreted as we're not doing anything.
Yep. So we talked about earlier.
If you call it main gaining, all of a sudden it's, oh shit, yeah, this is great. I'm main gaining now. You're just at maintenance. That's it. That's what maintenance is.
Yep.
It's main gaining. And it's funny. I used to be really angry when people would be like, how do I main gain? I'm like, we talk about this all the time. This is literally maintenance, but people are more amenable to calling it something else because it sounds like it has a purpose. Whereas for some reason, maintenance sounds like we're doing nothing. It's maintenance calories. It doesn't mean your body is maintaining. Your body, if you are pushing that progressive overload that we were talking about before, is going to improve strength, lean muscle, and body composition. So it's not maintenance progress, it's maintenance calories. And this is super nitpicky as a coach, but we probably do need to learn to term these things better because
100%.
Our words matter. And even though in the past I've gotten really annoyed by the term main gaining because people try to like bring it up as something different, there's probably something to it because it's finally made people pay attention to maintenance.
Yep.
It's a great way to do it because does it work? Yes. Is it super fast? You will not gain muscle at maintenance as fast as you will in a calorie surplus. Now, that doesn't mean that your calorie surplus has to be ridiculous. Let's go into 1,000 calories of hypercaloric diet. But if your goal is to really add on as much lean muscle as possible, this is why bulking and cutting cycles work. There's a difference between a smart bulking cycle, which for trained athletes is between the same thing in the opposite direction. It's about 250 to 500 calories in surplus.
Yep.
There's a difference between that, and people these days are now marketing that. And they're calling it lean bulk. They're calling it a lean bulk. But a lean bulk is just bulking correctly. It's no different than what bulking has been for the past 50 years. It's the same thing. It's a marketing spin. And it's a marketing spin to make it seem like it's different than what some people call the dreamer bulk.
The dreamer
bulk is literally just eating as much as you possibly can and hoping for the best outcome. That's where you really start to add on a lot of body fat. It's an uncontrolled calorie surplus. But real bulk, what real bulking is, when it's done correctly, it's controlled. That's what lean bulking is. It was just called bulking for the past 50 or 60 years. And then all of a sudden it's got a marketing trigger. Social media needs that.
But then to go back to the wording of it, I feel like bulking is definitely a word that kind of steers a lot of people away. Like you go to your female clients, hey, we're going to bulk. It's okay. So then again, it goes back to, like you said, the wording of how you word it. That's super important there.
Well, I call it a build.
Yeah, build. Yep.
So
That's what
I
I like
call it a
to.
build instead of a bulk because exactly what you just said. You're 100% right. You can't call it a bulk for a lot of people. You can't call it a bulk for most females, and you can't call it a bulk for most men who have lost a lot of body fat. If you've lost body fat, you tend to be very scared about putting any back on,
Mm-hmm.
even if your goals, even if this is the fastest way to your goals now, adding a little bit of body fat in a build or a bulk is expected. If you've lost the body fat already, you know that you can do it. And so the goal in a proper lean bulk or a normal bulk is to put on optimal lean muscle, because you can only put on so much lean muscle in a certain period of time. It's to put on that amount of lean muscle with as little fat gain as possible. But usually for most people, it'll be about a 1-to-1 ratio. So if
Unfortunately.
you put for men, so if you put on 5 pounds of muscle, you're probably going to put on 10 pounds overall. And so when people tell me, I hate having goal weights because I think goal weight is missing the point of proper goal setting. But if people come to me and they say, I want to be 200 pounds and lean, I'm like, okay, you're 180 now. So let's get up to 230 and then we'll cut down. That's the fastest way to get to where they want to go. It is. It's the fastest way. But it's going to be emotionally challenging. And so you need to lay that process out. And so then the question becomes, okay, do we do this bulking cycle that we get them there as fast as possible, or do we main gain to get there because this is what they need emotionally? And both answers are fine as long as you're okay with how long it's going to take to get there.
As you're talking about this, I'm just more so curious to hear your thoughts on how you go about this. But my kind of like general thought on this and philosophy is, like you said, hey, if we're really trying to maximize muscle growth and maybe you've already put on a good amount of muscle, like you're going to have to be in a surplus to keep building more. You're definitely not going to be able to do the main gaining thing, right? Like again, you could, but it's like going to be super, super slow. What I try to, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is maybe somebody who's always been trying to lose weight. Maybe they spend a lot more time in a deficit. They don't have as much muscle. Maybe spending some time at maintenance, a little bit higher into the maintenance range, and just really focusing on good training performance, making sure you are having good training that's geared towards building muscle, improving your sleep, improving your diet quality. Like you can probably get a lot out of that before you have to go into a surplus to really putting yourself in a better conditions of building muscle. Just curious to hear your thoughts and if that's how you go about situations like that.
So I love that idea because I think that it's a good compromise for people because they don't want to add on a ton of weight because they don't know if it works yet, particularly when they first start. And it's really hard to trust somebody while you're believing that you're getting body fat. And not only are you getting body fat, you're gaining muscle underneath. So it looks like you're gaining more body fat.
Yeah.
So every time you go into these builds, people are like, I am fat as shit. And you're like, you're not as fat as you think you are. First off, you still have kind of an outline of abs. You're going to lose that internal outline of your abs, most likely if you're doing a build correctly. That's just the way that it is. You're not going to maintain those abs, not unless you're on B12. Once you start to build that body fat, you're going to have that layer of body fat over top of the muscle that you build. So you're going to lose definition. You're going to feel puffy. You're going to feel big. And when you're comparing this to a depleted state, when you're in a cut where you have a lot less body water, where you have a lot less muscle glycogen, that's a false sense of how lean you are too, because the second you go back to maintenance, you lose a bunch of that. And I see this issue on both sides, people getting afraid of building correctly because they don't want to add on that they don't want to experience feeling fluffy. And then when we cut and I say, okay, we should come back up to maintenance, because I tell people that for most people, unless you're obese, you should probably spend half the year, if not more, at maintenance or above compared to being below. I think that's a good rule of thumb for most people. If you're obese, yeah, you can spend a lot of the year in a deficit, and that's okay. But if you're a normal weight person or lean in particular, you should spend more than half the year outside of a cut. So people get this false sense that when they're in a cut, that depleted state is what they look like. It's 100% not what you look like. That's like those guys getting on stage at the Olympia thinking that's what they look like every day. They don't look like that. And so coming to terms with how you look at maintenance is a strong thing. It's a good thing. It's difficult, but it's a good thing. And what you brought up when you first work with people, I think that the ideal is sitting at maintenance for a while. That's the ideal. You can get used to eating in a different manner, because the reality is you're going to be changing the way that you eat from what you've done for decades. You're going to get used to strength training, and falling in love with the way that you perform is a really good thing. Getting used to how your body feels around maintenance psychologically and emotionally is a very important thing. And so even if a person comes to me and they say, I want to put on a lot of muscle, but I'm concerned with the amount of body fat that I might have to put on, sitting around maintenance is probably the right move. And learning to fall in love with the performance increases and learning to fall in love with the way that your body actually looks at that time is important. And so are you making the right choice by telling a client, hey, let's sit at maintenance for a while? And by a while, it could be up to a year or two. And that's not unrealistic. And people think, oh my God, I'm not going to get to my goals within that time period. That's going to be a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Yeah. But you're changing a lifestyle that you've done before. You have to change what you've done in the past to get something different. And that requires a lot of habit work. It requires a lot of mindset shift. It requires a lot of expectation shifts. And we're going to be working towards getting there, but we need to do it in a way that's going to facilitate sustainability and learning these things the right way. And I think that going to a maintenance and then terming it something different so people like that better is probably the right move for most people.
Yep.
Even if the bulk is the better choice from a time standpoint, I think that it's probably the one that's going to be the least adhered to.
Yep.
And in my experience, the people that actually want to compete on a stage tend to adhere to it a little bit better because they're so neurotic. And so if you're a normal person and you don't have that neuroticism and that love for the gym already, give yourself a chance to be able to build that without it feeling like a drain on you or a drain on your lifestyle.
And another reason I bring this up too is, and we hit on this earlier, but it's like a lot of people, and I'm sure you see this, right? They ask, what's the best for building muscle? Is it this or that? And then again, their sleep's off. And what did we talk about earlier with the sleep? If sleep's not there and you're gaining weight, it's okay. That's probably not a great thing either. You know what I mean? So it's like really making sure you dial in some of those things that focus less on what your calorie surplus is, how much weight you need to gain, and more focus on those other things that are going to put you in a much better position and have a bigger kind of impact.
This brings up a really good point. One of the biggest issues that I find with people with building lean muscle is, remember how I brought up the study that people are usually off by X number of reps from what they think that they should be doing. If you jump into a build and people are off by that many reps, you are percentage-wise probably adding more body fat than you are, because you're not forcing. Your coach can give you the best plan possible, the best nutrition possible. You could be sleeping. If you're not pushing it as hard as you need to, you are not going to cause your body to force itself to adapt in the way that you want to build lean muscle. And in these initial periods, when you're working together, setting a person to maintenance for a while and then teaching them to get into that proximity to failure range may be beneficial, because then by the time that they go into the build later, it's going to be a more fruitful build. And the way that I do it is I actually run intensity checks with my clients. I run 3 to 4 month training blocks, and that blows a lot of people's minds because we want to work on progressive overload. So I want you to have a training program. I want you to keep notes. What did you do last week? Set 1, 2, 3, 4 for every exercise, whatever it is. I want you to have training notes. Each week, attempt to progress where you can. And that doesn't mean that if you did an incline bench press for 85 pounds, that the next week you're going to go up to 90, and then all 4 sets you're going to get 90. Maybe you do 85, 85, 90, 85. So the next week, maybe you do 85, 85, 90, 90. And that's 5 pounds different than what you did before. That's progressive overload. As you become more experienced, those gains tend to become farther and farther apart, but you're still pushing it. When you learn to do that, you are going to put yourself in the position to gain the most muscle possible from those increased calories and the least amount of body fat. But it does take learning that, because the large majority of the people that do this are off. And it's one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of people walking around with a lot of lean muscle, because they just have never learned to do that. And so I do intensity checks where I force clients, this says force, but we've agreed upon the fact that we're going to do this, where I force clients to take tailored sets. I'll say, okay, this exercise, this set, I want you to take this to absolute failure. I want you to keep going until you fail mid-set. use the weight that you used the previous week that you had in your notebook, and you said, this is what I did to be close to failure. Take that weight, go as far as you can until you fail in the middle of a set. And I'll always tell them, get a spotter. If it needs a spotter, use the spotting arms in a rack, whatever it is, to be safe. But I do want you to fail. And we'll take it there. And don't feel bad if you're off. Expect to be off. I've seen people that have been, the average, you're about 3 to 4 to 5 reps off. I've seen people be 11 and 12 reps off. I told them to get 10 reps and they get 22. And I go, and we look at it and they're like, oh shit, what just happened here? And I'm like, well, this is okay. This is why we run these tests. This is why we run blocks that are more than 2 weeks long. We don't change exercises every week. There's a difference between exercising and training. If you're changing your workout every week, change the exercises that you're doing every week, there's no stability there to be able to tell, am I progressing this movement? And so can that work? Yeah, it can, particularly if you're first starting out, because everything works. But for the most predictable long-term results, you need to be pushing progressive overload in some way. And that means you need some control. And so you want to run these programs a little bit longer than a couple weeks. 4 weeks is probably the shortest that I would run it. I think that's a little bit too quick. I think anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks is probably the sweet spot to where people get the most out of progressive overload and then don't get bored. I run training programs 4 to 6 months. And of my own, 4 to 6 months. But I'm also one of those people that I've gotten into the groove and I actually enjoy training and everything like that. When you're working with clients, they want things changed up a little bit more often, and that's okay. That's understandable. They're paying you. They want to feel like they're getting more out of it. They want the mental and emotional stimulation, and all that's okay. But there's that balance. If you want the best progress possible, you also don't want to be changing every 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks. And that's not to get down on coaches that change every 4 weeks. And if what the coach is doing is saying, hey, we're going to progress during this time period, we're going to progress you to lifting heavier, so maybe I'm going to drop the number of reps that you do. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like completely changing up
everything.
Program. Yeah, you did back squat this week. So then this week you're going to be doing trap bar squat. And then this week you're so jumbled up in trying to adjust, because it takes 4 weeks to really figure out what is the right weight range. If you've been given a prescribed number of reps, what's the right weight range to really be in it? It takes 2, 3, 4 weeks. And so if you're constantly changing things up like that, you're head faking the body and you may not be progressing as fast as you possibly could be. Now, people will always say, why don't I just run percentage type training then? I don't run percentage type training because if you look at like the percent of 1 rep max or something like that, I do for my main lifts for my strength athletes. We'll run it. And I actually have a progression that I run them through with that. But for the majority of lifts, and particularly for hypertrophy, I don't run percent of 1 rep max, because percent of 1 rep max is not accurate. It sounds like it's the most accurate because you're literally dealing with math. But the problem with the human body is that we're not robots. And so for you, if I tell you to lift 10 reps at whatever percent of your 1 rep max, that percent might be appropriate for you, but it might be 5% too low for me, or it might be 10% too high for somebody else. The farther away that you move from single reps to that 1 rep max, the more inaccurate it becomes. And so for strength training, I use it a lot for 1 to 5 when I'm doing specific strength training. I won't use it beyond 5, because 1 to 3, it's pretty damn accurate. Beyond that, you really start to get hazy. And that's where you start to look at those studies. And that's where the ones where we're working at 70% and maybe 10 to 12 reps, people can be off. The discrepancy is between 2 and 30 reps for what people can get. And it all depends on how long are they resting? How is their sleep been? The genetics of the person. Do they have a good cardiovascular system? Because believe it or not, that can add into muscular endurance as well. And so all of these things add in, and you start to lose the specificity of the percentage training. So this all comes back to, what can we do to maintain the most control and work in proximity to failure? And learning proximity to failure is a skill. And so would putting somebody at closer to maintenance calories for longer periods of time, particularly when they start, be a good plan? Hell yeah, it can be a good plan. Yeah. And it's something that people will fight against, because again, they hate the term maintenance and they think they're not doing anything. But it's not maintenance. It's far from it. And even if you've done the whole thing where you've lost body weight, I always tell my clients, I want you to stay on with me for 2 to 3 months after we've reached your goals. It sounds like a sell, 100%. Sounds like a sell. I want you to stay on for 2 to 3 more months after we've reached our goals, because it would amaze people how much more difficult it is to learn to live at that new body than it was to get down there. Learning to live at your new maintenance is a skill too. And sticking with a coach during that time period is essentially insurance on your gains.
Yep, I love it. Buying that insurance on your gains, and that's
Yeah.
that's what we want. And you talk. I'm glad you brought up the training intensity aspect of it, because that is important too, and that's honestly one of the biggest things there, right? So again, like you said, if you're in a surplus, you think, oh, hey, I heard that, hey, for muscle gain, surplus is the best, but then you're also not, like you said, training hard enough, and that's a big problem. You mentioned, hey, some people are off by 10 plus reps. That's going to make a big difference. Definitely, I think the context of it is key, like we have talked about throughout. Was there anything else you wanted to follow up with here on this, or?
I think that we covered a wide array of topics pretty well, but that's it. There was a lot of important stuff in there. And I think that there's a lot of good caveats, both for coaches and for people that are looking to do this thing. And I think that there isn't a right or wrong answer on how to do these things outside of sacrificing your lean muscle. So we gave you some guidelines on how to make sure that you don't do that. After that, it's your choice on how you want to progress that will fit your expectations and be the easiest for you to do mentally and emotionally. And you have a couple ways that you can get there, but you can only do what biology allows. And so as long as you understand that, you have the choice. So take control. Use this as a way for you as a person that wants to go on one of these journeys. Look at all this information. Ask for proof if you have questions about it, or if you're skeptical. And I'm sure that Jeff or I can both provide references to those types of things, and then make an informed decision, because if you make that informed decision, you're going to be at the best position to move forward.
100%. And I'm glad you brought up, to at the end of the day, you have the choice, but you also have to be realistic with things, right? Again, hey, you want to lose body fat, build muscle. We know you can do it, but you have to be realistic with that rate of progress, and know the limitations of going that route. Allan, appreciate your time, man. A ton of great information in here. We went off topic initially with the supplements, but a ton of great stuff there for people to utilize. So I guess before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to find more about you and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can always look up. I've got a pretty heavy research-based blog on mauiathletics.com. The links to my social media accounts are down below. You can click on those. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Send me a DM on Instagram at Dr. Allan Bacon, DRALAN Bacon. And I'm more than happy to help you out as much as I can.
Awesome. Yep. Easy name to remember, easy name to spell out, and everything like that as well too. And you're always active on social media, always answering questions. So if you have any, just reach out there. So Allan, again, appreciate your time, man, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Jeff.